Okay, we're starting with Bob's work here. This is from the first week of February that we entitled Picnic in the Sun. And, I think our main objective, one of the objectives in here was to convey a sense of lovely warm sunlight and shadow. Of course, it was dealing with the actual colour of shadow. I have to say, Bob, I think you've got fantastic trees here. I can see that you're getting really quite adept now at using the side of the brush to create those tree shapes in the upper foliage. I think you're really getting to grips with that. I like the tree trunks too. They're just nicely there's a nice weight to them. They're not too heavy, they're not too dark, they're broken. And yeah, really liking the way you're painting your trees at the moment, Bob. Nice sense of light across here. So the only thing I would sort of give you some advice here about, I think, Bob, is two things really. Let me just grab a pen here, or a pencil. That's the sort of field that we wanted to convey as being, having the most sunlight on it. The thing is, I think it probably means that this has to be a bit warmer still. I mean, what you could do, you could make this back area a little bit lighter. You could lift a little bit of that out gently with some water and tissue paper and keep this foreground yellow as it is. But I do like the one at the back there. It does convey a nice sense of warm light. So I think what you probably have to do is put even more warmth in the foreground, because what you've got at the moment is exactly the same color. It's the same color and it's the same temperature. There is a little bit of light in the upper stretches of this nearer ground, which is good, but that might have been better used in the furthest warmth back there. So you've got to somehow tell your viewer that through the use of temperature and color intensity, that this area here is closer and warmer. So so you might, it might be better, as I say, to perhaps lift a little bit of that out, and I think that way you will achieve that sense of these two areas being further away from each other. And one other thing here, Bob. I love the shadow. Comes across the ground very nicely here, but I think you might have just got a little bit lost with what to do with this shape here. I think it was something we brought up in one of the most recent lessons, by where this has got to look different. You needed a little bit of sense of vertical here. We don't know exactly what this area is from the photo, other than there were some things growing up out of the ground, some weeds. So I think this was one of those classic cases of, if you don't sketch it out and decide what it is before you start painting, this is what you end up with. It's as though the shadows being used to create a different object. So we need to do something about that. We need to be able to differentiate between what this is. I mean, there is some texture in here in places. There's good use of lifting out, but there's no temperature change at all in here, and there's no change of brush direction. So whilst the shadow, as you would imagine, is running linear, very horizontal, this has got to do the opposite, just to say that it's not really an odd looking shadow. It's actually, if it is it's something in shadow, but the thing that it is growing vertically out of the ground, and that will separate it from the confusion of it being part of the shadow. So yeah, it is in shadow, but just a couple of scrapes with the brush handle or your fingernail, or even just slightly drier brushwork would have given us a sense that this is some sort of vegetation growing up. But overall, that's a really good painting. I think you're becoming a bit of a master with those trees there, Bob. Yeah, good work. Okay, now next up we have Christine's, and good light again. There's a lot of light here. There's a lot of shadow, but I'm not sure what's throwing that shadow. It could be a cloud. I think what it is, we've lost the trees. This little tree here. If you just grab that pen again. Whoops, just go back there a second. Yeah, I think we've lost the trees. This upper area was the idea that if we're going to put shadows, if we're going to use this bright sunlight, we've got to have something throw in those shadows. Now, you could sort of say that this big shadow, that's a huge shadow, that's obviously not coming from this little tree or that one. So we've actually lost that lovely big canopy of tree above our heads that we were using to sort of create the light and dark. You could argue, of course, that this is a shadow from a cloud up in the sky and has nothing to do with the trees. So just pointing that out, Chris, it's back to that sort of logic thing, you know, thinking on a practical basis. That if you're going to use a shadow like that, this occurs in the planning. You know, when you're drawing out your sketch, you think, well, if you're going to offer such a huge chunk of shadow, we've really got to sort of say, well, there must be something throwing that. And at the moment, I don't think there's enough tree. There just isn't enough tree in this painting to throw that shadow. So, yeah, be careful there, Chris. I like, as I say, I like the light, and yeah, need a little bit of more of a play off from the hard dark lines too. If you can, Chris, there's something missing, I think, at the moment. It's something I'd like you to be practicing, and that is using the belly of the brush to make. I think there's been an angle on these brush deliveries here that hasn't come off the belly of the brush at all. That's come off the point of the brush. Little looking for some evidence of paint coming off the belly of the brush in the painting, and I can't see that much. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you, if you can, to take a few scraps of paper over the next couple of weeks and start developing very big trees, but off the belly of the brush, off the side of the brush. And that will give us, I mean, what you know, I'm not going to dismiss what's going on in the background. That's beautiful. What's going on back there, that's wet in wet. That might be off a certain amount of off the belly of the brush, even though it's wet in wet. But what we need to get in here now is a slightly drier mix off the belly of the brush, which will give you these wonderful big trees up here. So the trees don't look quite so sad. So yeah, think about that, Chris, and do practice that technique of fully loading a big round brush and scooping it across the surface of the paper, just using the belly, the side of the brush fibers. But really good light, yeah, like that. Okay, next up we have Gwen. I'm guessing, Gwen, you wanted to finish this, but probably felt a little bit sort of felt as though you ran out of time a little bit to get it in submitted for the critique. I can see the figures are drawn out really nicely, but they haven't been actually painted in. So you know, consider that. I think you ought to sort of consider that a bit, and just be a little bit careful with some of these edges in the background, and put some warmth in the foreground. If I just take a large brush with a color on it here, a warm color on it. Imagine this area a little bit warmer, a little bit deeper in color, like this. And that deeper, warmer color in the foreground shows off the lighter yellow back there better. So yeah, there's a lot of dry brush work in there, Gwen. Careful of the balance with that if you can. It's funny, you know, some of us will do too much dry brush work and some of us not enough. So just be a little bit careful, Gwen. It's actually, it does bring some character to this tree. I've got to say that. I like this tree. It's like something from, you know, the illustration of a storybook. Yeah, it's nice. There's some beautiful things going on in this tree here. Some of the textures of the old wood in that tree trunk are beautiful. Yeah, very good, Gwen. Very good. Just give some thought to using creating, playing off this. The wonderful work that you've done, that you have achieved in this tree, would look even more lovelier if we put a little bit more softness around it in other areas. It's good. Well done. It's good. Okay, and next up here we got Liz's work. Now that's a lovely canopy of trees. So it works well. You know, the story we're given up here matches the story that we're given down here on the ground. So it is that sort of it's that logical thing. You know that you know you can't have this without this canopy up here. So I think that's really good, Liz. This is a lovely painting. Very good shadows. I haven't mentioned that much about the figures with the previous submissions. Again, I think that's something nobody can teach you how to convey those little figures en masse at distance. They're something and nothing. We shouldn't worry about, you know, it's something that we should just almost have this half-minded sort of, you know, you just place in a couple of small shapes, and in time you'll learn to make the right mark for that type of thing. It's impossible to dissect it and analyze it when you start doing things like that with such a small amount of detail, like these little figures. You will go wrong. It will become become like a pressure point to you, where you think, oh no, I'm supposed to do figures here, you know. They're just a couple of dots and dashes with the odd suggestion of a head or even a leg tucked under the chair. But I think these are good, Liz. I think these figures look good. I like the way you've shown a little bit of light on the foliage over here, indicating that there's something going on that's different to the rest of the area. But those trees are beautiful. You could, you know, if one very small note perhaps to make is that it might have been nice to have seen the wrong color completely. Let me just grab another card. Just grab a little bit of the warmth. It might have been nice. This is a very crude color I'm using here. The limitations of this thing that I'm using. But some of these warm siennas might have been nice on the just dotted around here. In the upper right territories of those, because what you've got is a grey-purple upper painting and a yellow lower painting. Now they complement. They do. Those two colours do complement each other. Of course, we know that. But I do wonder whether some sunlight, because there's a lot of it around, whether some of that sunlight might have just been hitting a small bunch of leaves up here, a little cluster of leaves here and there. But other than that, Liz, fine painting. Yeah, very good. And next here we have Linda's painting. Very good, Linda. Just looking at the textures, looking at your trees. Very good building. We've left the figures out, that's fine. You can add those, of course, at a later date. So probably just going to mention this, by the way, is excellent. You've given us a good indication here of what's happening in the left-hand side. I mean, this posed as a bit of a problem for a couple of us, and myself included on the day. But I think the point I was hoping I've made on before is you'll always get a problem area in just about every painting you do. So it further it further sort of exacerbates the importance for making your sketch in the first place. That sketch will be the opportunity for you to decide what that area is going to be. Even if that area is going to be nothing important, it still has to sort of read as something. Doesn't have to be a detailed object, but just an object that's recognizable. So I think you've done a grand job of that there, Linda. Now, I'm going to say there's another situation here, I think, by where I don't think the shadow and the tree sort of, I think the shadow is basically too deep, too big, given the amount of tree that we have in the vicinity. You know, again, we could argue there's a whopping great tall tree, you know, over to the right, just out of sight here, casting a massive shadow like this. So be a little bit careful there, Linda, with the shadow area. You know, we can get away with quite a lot in our paintings, but there does become a point, I think, where, you know, unless you're going into the sort of surreal world, which we're not really. We're loose style, yes, we're impressionists, but we're not surrealists as such. And you know, this is something I can remember sort of coming to grips with myself in my learning curve, was learning to make good shapes. And I think that's where, you know, I need to cut people slack. We are learning, after all. This is the whole purpose of these critiques. So I mean, what I will say is that the shadow looks fantastic. It's a really good balanced shadow. So but would the shadow be this big, this deep? So it's back to that sort of, think of the real world, think of the practicalities, the you know, if a shadow is this big, what is actually throwing that shadow? Because it's probably a little too big for the trees in the scene. Your trees are so good, by the way. Love what's going on in your foliage up here. Really good brushwork. So yeah, it might have been nice to, I think what I might have done if it was my painting, I might have just taken a bit, I'd have left, if I just get rid of that much shadow there, that might sort of, that might be more in keeping with the amount of, sorry about the color, it's too intense, but that width of shadow might be more suited, more in keeping with the trees that we do have in our painting. But this is good. This is you know, decisive stuff. This means that you've been planning and you've decided what you're going to do with this area. It's good field at the background there. Whoops. Good field back there. You could continue those lovely browny red, almost a plummy coloured hedgerow at the back of that field. I think that would have been great if you'd have continued it all the way along. Let me get rid of all this yellow. A second. Yeah, I think don't be afraid. You know, I'm guessing that you probably thought, "Oh, that's enough. I'll stop. It'd be more interesting if I stop that back hedgerow where I did there." But it's a fine line again between, you know, making something interesting. You've got to remember the things in the distance back there. Yeah, they need to look good, but you've got to be careful not to make them too interesting at the same time. So I'd have just continued along and completed that horizontal, because there's such a strong horizontal in this. Yeah, but you know, if it was my painting now, I know what I'd be writing on the back of this. Just a big pat on the back, because as subtle as that hedgerow is back there, it's beautifully done. It's very well handled, wet in wet, but keeping the object, the identification of the object at the same time. And the same to be said, you know, about the trees. A little bit more flatness from the belly of the brush in the trees, as I've mentioned it before for some of the others we've looked at. So, but honestly, yeah, it's coming together very nicely, Linda. Well done. Suzanne's painting. A good canopy of tree again. And I think your trees work well with the shadows, Suzanne. Yeah, I think they're talking to each other. Tree and shadow. It's a lovely bit of, love the way you've flooded a bit of water into these upper tree canopies. That too enhances that bleaching, that light that comes through the canopy and bleaches out some of the definition. That's really, really good. I'm going to mention the figures on yours, Suzanne, again. I think they're a little too dark. They look a little bit black, you know, that sort of intense black. It is a fine line between making them dark enough to pop out and making them too dark. So you want to, if you think that the mark you're making for the object and the distance, proximity from the viewer's eye, if you think that's too dark, then just lift out a little bit of the dark, because it will eventually, any mix will get, if it gets to a point where it gets so dark, you can't find the temperature in it. We still need, even if it's only a sort of like a light bluey grey, that's at least you're offering a colour there, a slightly, or it was a light warm grey. You know, that means there's a bit of red evident or something like that. There's still a little, there's that evidence of there being colour, but that it's mostly tone, but not too dark at that distance. So the type of strength of darkness you've got in those little figures, I would think would be the reserve of something much closer to the viewer's eye. Just something like, you know, I'm trying to, let me just grab. Well, it's so close to black, that's the problem, I think. We need something about this dark, and it would be up here much closer to us. So you can imagine these figures of a tonal value, not necessarily the color that I've used here because of the limitations of this app that I'm using, but if you can imagine that this sort of brown that I'm using is the tonal value in some of those figures like that, and they suddenly become, there's more depth to them, they don't look so flat anymore. So yeah, that's the only thing, and that can be easily fixed now at any time you like, because you could go over that with a just you know, a mix, very small amount of white paint, very small amount of white paint, and perhaps your chosen color, a little bit of light red, I mean, I don't want you turning the figures red or blue for that matter, but something that if you look close enough, you can see that it's probably a bit of a blue or a bit of a red rather than a black. Hope that makes sense. Yeah, great. Love what's going on over here too. There could be call for one more texture, I think, Suzanne. Um, you've got very similar texture going on, albeit it is softer in the background, but there is evidence of the same sort of textures in the background as there is over here and up in the canopy. So you might just want to push something far more, it's a difficult word to find here, less busy, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. It might only be this area here. Probably can't see this because of this colour I've got on my brush here. It might just be this area here that's bothering me. It needs to be, I think, made very different to everything else. It needs to move away from the horizontal. There's a horizontal, those are good. Needs to be closer to the vertical of the trees, I think, because that way it sort of helps knit the foreground. If you can imagine, just do fewer lines here. If you can imagine something that just seems to have a sense of vertical here, like that, that will knit the foreground into the midground, and then the trees do the rest, because from the midground to the background, the tree verticals do that for us. So yeah, it's this thing about, I think, knitting, tying things together through the proximity, the depth of the painting. So it is texture, going back to that, I think, Suzanne. I think if we did use it more of a sort of vertical shape, brushwork, whatever, brush mark here, that would be, I think that would work better. And a flatter, it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but you almost want a flat area with a little bit of indication of something vertical going through it. Yeah, a third texture. We've got the flat, that's one texture, the flatness. The shadow's flat, the light is flat. The second texture is the lovely open. I think there's a lot of belly of the brush used up here. Some off the point of the brush I can see. So we've got two textures. We need a third texture. And as I say, you probably that's where we needed to do it here. Something that's not quite as busy, but a little bit busy than the flatness of the horizontals. It's good though, lovely looking painting again. They've all been really good. All of us have submitted good work off this, and I hope you can bear in mind what I've brought up, the few things that have brought up, and we can move on to the next level. So well done folks, thanks for submitting, and I'll see you at the next one.